Welcome back to round 3. We've got our very own Eric Dupuis facing against Warren Connell, playing his Pyromancer Gush list that he credited Steve Menendian with the design.
I like the list a lot. I haven't changed my list at all, but I was looking at lists similar to Warren's to mix it up. Ultimately, I stayed with my list due to time constraints and concerns about the workshop matchup. When I'm looking over Warren's list, he does a little bit to try and hedge that. He has Ancient Grudge's main deck, and he also has the heavy sideboard versus the shop decks as well. But ultimately, I wasn't comfortable enough with that. The mana base is really greedy, and you also have Gush, which can be a problem. So here you see me leading out with the Thoughtseize. His hand is a lot of cards you want in the end game, but not really with the beginning of the game. The Vamp is interesting in that it can grab Ancestral. Gush, you're going to need to hit your second land drop. He doesn't even have a second land yet. Yogg Will and Jace, again, those are awesome when you've got the mana and something going on. I probably make the worst choice I can make here. I've got a lot of different things to think about, and I just pretty well throw it away by grabbing the Gush to kill the suspense. I think ultimately the Jace would have been the correct play. The Yawgmoth's Will isn't going to do very much in the situation. There's nothing even in the graveyard. I've got a misstep for the Vamp in hand. And yeah, he doesn't even have the second land for Gush. So
Right.
Ultimately a really bad choice, and it pretty well defines this game.
Well, that just goes to show you how one decision can just affect like all your further plays in the game. So you've got that Thoughtseize, Warren. Didn't see what he drew there.
At this point, my hand has a lot of goodness. I've got Mystical Tutor, Vamp Tutor. What I should probably be doing is, during my upkeep, Mystical for Ancestral, and then try and resolve Ancestral. I've been saying it, even on camera, almost ad nauseum, that my game plan is get Ancestral, run it out there, and then try and get a Snapcaster and do it again. And if any of that sticks, you're in an amazing spot. And I just don't follow my own advice here, and I pay dearly. So we've got a fetch from Warren. His cards are beautiful.
Oh yeah.
He really pays a lot of careful effort to get the choicest versions, get the deck exactly how he wants it. So I've got the misstep for the Vamp, which is why I wouldn't have taken that, even though it was the only card he could actually play.
Yeah, Warren's deck, he does play the 3 Flusterstorm and 3 Mental Misstep with the... Does he have 4 Force of Will in here? Oh yeah, 4 Force of Will. So there's a chance that he would be able to draw a counter backup in order to make that resolve. So we got a Brainstorm. Probably have a fetch land in hand. That's a play I recognize from Legacy.
Yes. And I played this game like I was playing Legacy, which is just not correct for Vintage. I end up getting rid of a Mystical Tutor out of my hand and keeping a Lightning Bolt based off of the fact that he may have something I need to answer. And that's just not how you play this format successfully, especially not with my list. There are lists that play like that, but this is not one of them. The way I needed to play was get out in front with card advantage and make it so he has to answer what I'm doing. I shouldn't have to worry about a young Pyromancer resolving.
Right, you want to be on the proactive strategy instead of a reactive strategy.
Absolutely. So here I'm going to run out, I believe, a Tutor. No, a Soul Ring. So moving forward, I've got the ability to either Mystical or Vamp for Tinker, which, based off of his hand, if I had grabbed the Jace, I'd be in amazing shape. Mm-hmm. Instead, I've really compromised my plan here. So a comedy of errors on my side of the board, really played myself out of this game.
So you're representing Force of Will mana right now.
And looking for an end step, top deck tutor. Unfortunately, the top deck tutor has been shuffled away, so all I have is Vamp, Lightning Bolt, and I don't actually recall the last card, but it's not where I need to be. Remember, I left him with a handful of insanity. He has Yawgmoth's Will, he has a Jace, so I'm going to have to stop those cards.
Right.
So you really can't just sit around and wait and see where things goes when your opponent already has the goods in hand. I mean, you need to close the door before those cards come online, and I absolutely failed to do that. A card like Lightning Bolt is not, well served for that situation.
Right, because even if you get to bolt his Jace, he still already gets to draw 3 cards off of it.
Yes, absolutely. So I know Fast Bond doesn't matter here, based off of his hand. The hand is still
He doesn't have a Gush,
all
most
6
likely.
cards. Yeah, I mean he's got the Yawg Will, but if I counter the Fast Bond, then I can't counter the Yawg Will, and he's just going to get it back anyways. So
Right.
It's a really bad situation I've put myself in here. So I run out an end of turn tutor.
Do you remember what you grabbed with the tutor?
I grabbed a counterspell to the face, is what I grabbed. He missteps it, and now I don't have a mystical tutor,
Oh, yeah.
so I'm pretty well sucking wind. I've got a counterspell and a lightning bolt in hand. So this is a disaster. I believe it's a Force of Will in my hand.
That would make sense.
So I have to draw. I know he's going to be dropping a Jace, so I've got a Force of Will that I can potentially throw at that, but the Yawg Will is also a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So here we go, tapping out for the Jace. I've got the Bolt in hand. I'm going to let it resolve and hope that he brainstorms, and that's not going to end up working. He's going to end up Fate Sealing here, which is a very conservative play. In his spot, I actually would have brainstormed and been fine with them bolting it if they were bad enough to keep the Lightning Bolt in their hand. I've already done card selection. I mean, he's got the Yawgmoth's Will. I'd be setting up for a really sick Yawg Will. In the bin, he's already got the Gush. He's got the Fast Bond in play, and he's got a Vamp.
Lands.
I mean, he's just gonna go absolutely nuts if he's gonna resolve that Yawg Will.
He allows you to draw that card, and you just pass it right back. Brainstorm.
So from Warren's side of the table, I would be looking to jam that Yawgmoth's Will as soon as possible. The longer he waits,
The more responses you could potentially have.
yes. Now he may just be thinking he's got the Jace, he can ride it out. It doesn't take a lot to get Jace off the table. The Lightning Bolt combined with a Snapcaster is definitely going to get him out of there.
Right.
So it's really not that safe, and I don't think he wants to try Fate Sealing me out of the game with his list. It's possible, but I mean it's running cards like Tendrils of Agony. Like usually you want to brainstorm into the goods and just end the game instead of dirtling around.
Yeah.
So here I've got my own Jace. And that's what I was talking about. He can't afford to let me get back into the game. It's not like he's got a ton of counters where he can stop me from following my game plan.
Right, he might have maybe 1 or 2 in his hand at the most.
So dueling Jaces,
This looks
thanks
so
to the
awkward for me.
Yeah, I mean the new M14 update really changes things. You'll find in Vintage already the more powerful deck is pretty happy to have the Jace on board, and the other person is just trying to catch up. So like a lot of the bug lists, for example, you don't even see as many Jaces because they don't do what they used to do, in that you could keep your opponent off of Jace. Now, if you have a Jace in the bug list and then your opponent who's playing like a combo control list lands their Jace, you're really not happy about it.
Right, because they're gonna have potentially more explosive draws where the bug list is gonna brainstorm into very very much middle of the road sort of very fair types of draws.
Yeah, the best they can hope for is to cash in their creatures that are excess for more counters. But again, you're brainstorming on your side of the table, and they can always bounce your guy. So, I mean, the better deck makes better use of Jace, and it's a problem for the person playing from behind. Here, I mean, Warren's deck is really powerful, and he already has the cards. I mean, he has 2 of the most dangerous cards in his hand already, in Yawgmoth's Will and Tendrils of Agony. So in this situation, these hands, I mean, my Jace is just trying to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been nice if I could have gotten rid of his Jace and then just try and counter his Yogg Will, and then the game would be at a nice even parity. But instead, he's just going to keep getting more and more dangerous cards that I have to worry about.
Right. Now at this point, he can shuffle away the top two, and maybe that Gush is starting to look a little more tempting. He has Mental Misstep and Force of Will in hand. So, is he ready to commit? No, not yet.
Warren playing very hesitantly. Jace brainstorming. Yeah, Jace is definitely just going to brainstorm mode. I mean, the fate sealing is totally irrelevant when your opponent has a Jace. You're not going to be fate sealing somebody out of the game. I mean, this is not going to go another 5 turns.
And Warren doesn't have any creatures on the table that would represent a threat to Jace.
The only creatures that he's running is the young Pyromancer, and he's going to be able to make tokens if he gets that guy, and Jace really doesn't do much to answer that. So here we go, trying to get the Jace out of there. We've got a lightning bolt, he's fine with that one, and I've got the second bolt, which is a sad line of play. That's really not where I want to be.
Looks like Warren is considering mental misstepping that. I don't see why that would be a bad play.
Yeah, at this point I was just trying to get counters out of his hand. I wasn't too optimistic that it was going to resolve, but I know he has the Yawgmoth's Will, and whenever he decides to pull the trigger, I've got to stop it or the game is just going to end.
Mana drain on the...
Really hoping to
Draw the
get
force
him out of counters. We'll see what Warren does here. I may have actually blundered. Do I have the force and the blue card at this point?
I know you have the force. I don't know if you have a blue card.
I better have the blue card, otherwise this is just a horrifically bad line of play. I mean, that Yawgmoth's Will threatens to end the game whenever he casts it. He's got the Gush and the Vamp, so he's going to be able to draw whatever he wants off of that Gush.
Maybe like a Black Lotus. Well, that wouldn't be too good after the graveyard, but...
Yeah, he's going to have plenty of mana because he's got the fetch lands, and then Gush is going to add 2 mana every time he casts it.
True.
So the usual suspects...
Ancestral Recall, maybe.
Ancestral is definitely an option. Another Gush is an option. Time Walk is really good in that spot. He could potentially grab the Pyromancer, depending on what else he has in his hand. I mean, there's a lot of different ways he can go. So I do get the force out of his hand.
Get the force out of there. I mean, that seems like where you want to be.
That's all, I mean, it's all I could really do there. I'm not gonna get the value out of those lightning bolts any other way. I've got 2 lands on top of my deck, which I really don't need. So yeah, let's see where this goes. The Jace activation is very, very dangerous right here. If he can get any piece of counter magic, it's a blowout. We have
Is he gonna Mystical Tutor before he does it? Before he brainstorms with Jace? No.
Oh, we've got a Gush, black-blue. Devastating.
It's gonna allow Jace to see deeper.
Yeah, I mean, at this point he's seeing 5 cards. I mean, this is bad. This is not what I needed to see.
Right. He can regrow the Gush.
He can regrow the Yawg Will. If I counter it, he can just bring it right back.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
this is such a bad spot. This is absolutely, I mean, for someone having a Jace on the table, I'm in about as bad a shape as you can get. Yeah, his draw engine is ready to take hold. I don't really have a good way to catch up with this. I've talked in the past about how I really like the Gush lists in theory, but I have been staying away from them due to their workshop matchups. And this is a point where it really shines, because my way back into this game looks like Dark Confidant, and that's just not going to cut it. I mean, Dark Confidant hits the table and I pass the turn and I really haven't done anything. Whereas Gush is 2 cards immediately. Very, very different in terms of the explosiveness.
Right. Without the fast bind, though, Gush really, the disadvantage probably doesn't outweigh the benefit.
Well, I'd take it here because you've got the flood of mana on his side of the board. How about he gushes, returns those 2 lands, then shuffles them away with a fetch land? I mean, that starts to get really good. Those 2 lands that come back are not dead, especially when you've got a card like Jace. Back in the day, the Gush decks were able to run as little as 18 mana sources because they had the full boat of brainstorms, and that's really what you aim to do, is just keep 2 mana sources on the table. Obviously, workshops have really changed that dynamic, but that interaction is still really powerful, and Gush, in some games, really says draw 4 cards, especially if you're trying to get back to something like Library of Alexandria. You can just go right back, boom, 7 cards in hand, tap to draw, and just start outdrawing your opponent 2-1. So we've got a regrow for Vamp. Almost any line of play Warren takes here is going to be lethal.
Yeah.
He has so many lines. He could make like the 30th best play and it'd still beat me. So let's see how he chooses to do it.
I think you grabbed the Young Pyromancer.
Yeah, that's not an unreasonable play here. It's going to close the game out pretty easily.
Young Pyromancer into Yawgmoth's Will, into many tokens, tendrils.
He's still got the Vamp for the Time Walk if he wants to. I mean, it really is, choose your own adventure here. This is going nowhere on my side of the table. We finally get around to the Jace activation. That's
Ripped a Force of Will.
That's not going to be necessary. He's got so many different cards to just really shut me out here. And the Young Pyromancer is a beating when you have a counter war. I mean, you're trying to stop your opponent from furthering their plan, and you're just helping them out.
Absolutely, run it out there before you play the Yawgmoth's Will, and then it's like, even if it doesn't resolve, you still have such a arsenal.
Yeah, it's really, really awesome that they gave us this tool to play with. I've made Dryad work before. Queer and Dryad, for those who aren't familiar, gets a +1/+1 counter every time you play a white, blue, black, or red spell. And the problem is Jace answers it so easily, and Swords to Plowshares gets rid of it. Like, it's just this single creature, whereas Pyromancer does a very similar thing in terms of increasing your amount of damage on board, but now if they get rid of it, you still got essentially your +1/+1 counters behind in the form of 1/1 tokens. And here we've got the Yawg Will off of a Lotus. I've got the 2 counters in hand, the Force of Will in hand. I believe he was able to get to the point where he had at least a Force. We may actually see a Flusterstorm here.
Would the Storm copies make more Pyromancer tokens?
No, it's when you cast a spell. So I pitched Flusterstorm there, and he has the Flusterstorm back, so it actually didn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Flusterstorming it would have been better. I kind of checked out mentally there, because he did play a bunch of spells beforehand, but ultimately wouldn't have changed the result of the game, seeing that he had a Flusterstorm.
Right.
So that was not ideal. Let's say that. Lightning Bolt's an interesting card in this matchup, and that I do want to be able to kind of deal with the Pyromancer on occasion.
Right.
But I would prefer to be able to ignore it.
Yeah, like you said to me, I think it was yesterday, you don't want to be worried about a Young Pyromancer. If you're worried about that, then you're probably losing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to be able to assemble Vault Key, I want to tinker Blightsteel, I want to further my game plan, and I just want to look at a Young Pyromancer as telling me how many turns I have before I need to win the game. Really, getting rid of it with a Bolt isn't going to be too profitable. There's been a lot of talk about dealing with the tokens as well. People are talking about cards like Illness in the Ranks, which people who've been around in Vintage are being a little heavy-handed with it. They're also saying it can handle the Orchard tokens for Oath of Druids. Ultimately, it's not really where you want to be. It's a one casting cost spell, so maybe in a deck like Oscar's, it could be worthwhile. But in terms of the more powerful Grixis lists and bug lists, very unlikely that that's going to end up being worthwhile.
So what do you think? Do you think Warren sideboards at all? Maybe Thought Seizes come in against you? Maybe not.
He's pretty well positioned versus me. Thoughtseize is a totally reasonable card. He certainly doesn't need to worry about the the mountain jailers, any of the graveyard hate. His only option aside from that would be Nature's Claim, and that could be used to break up Voltaic Key and Time Vault.
Right.
Could also be used to potentially gain him some life in a really bad situation, but probably not worth it compared to any of the other cards in his list.
And he also has he still has the main deck Ancient Grudges, so since you're not a shops deck, he probably doesn't particularly need the extra slew of artifact removal.
Yeah, the Ancient Grudges are very interesting. He could swap those out for the Thoughtseizes. He could also keep them in to try and break up the Voltaic Key Time Vault combo, or he could just hope it ends up being a double disenchant against my Moxes. It's very possible that I could have a very artifact-heavy draw, and he could land a Pyromancer and just kind of go aggro while wiping out my mana base. That does happen. Now, he doesn't have anything else to support it, like Wastelands or Strip Mines, but we'll see down the line what these lists end up doing. I'm very excited about Pyromancer. I think there's a lot of different directions it can go in. These Gush lists are really fun to watch. There's also a Skull Clamp heavy version that I'm working on with Rich Shea. I've talked to him a few times about it. He won a tournament with it. A lot of improvements happening with that. So here I've got a first turn Merchant Scroll off of Mana Crypt. At least this time I'm finding Ancestral.
Yeah.
That's the game plan. We'll see what happens with it. Mana Crypt isn't ideal on turn 1 here. I'm not using the full mana. I'm setting myself up to be taking damage versus a deck that wins off of doing damage, but I'll take it.
So on your side of the table, are you going to bring in your Nile Spellbomb maybe?
Surgical Extraction for sure. That was really the card that I was excited about here. His whole draw engine is based on Gush, and once one goes into the graveyard, it's open season. If I can get that out of there, his deck really doesn't have any way to do anything explosive. His Yawgmoths will do very little. Replaying your artifacts like Black Lotus don't do that much for you in this build. It doesn't do anything with the Pyromancer. So he's got the Ancestral naturally. He didn't need to tutor for it. That is always nice.
And he chooses to do it on his main phase, which means that he's probably has some stuff to play out, unless he's going to discard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty questionable line unless he has the artifact mana already in hand. Mm-hmm. It looks like he's got some counter spells, and that is, yeah, he doesn't have it. That is a questionable line. I don't see that being anywhere near worth the risk. He's going to end up having to discard here. Yeah, that is a very costly one.
Not where you want to be.
We'll see if I can capitalize on that, because I would definitely consider that an error. He's got the Force of Wills in hand, but again, now you're going down even fewer cards, so it's pretty costly.
2. Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, that is very, very costly. Being on the draw there and just firing that out. The upside, if he had hit the artifact mana, he'd be in awesome shape.
Right.
But, discarding 2 is just devastating there. So we know he has the Force. So now he's down to 5 cards in the hand. He's down 4 cards since he cast the Ancestral.
Yeah, when he could have just responded to your Ancestral.
Yes.
Because that's what he was worried about, I think, is he knew you had Ancestral, so he didn't want you to be able to respond to his Ancestral, but you didn't have the information. You didn't know he had an Ancestral, so you would have just ran it out there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would consider that an error, so we'll see if I can make him pay for that. But so far, missing my land drop, not looking good. Not going to be able to flash back Ancestral without a Snapcaster and another blue source.
And your Mana Crypt is already chipping away at your life total, so if you're not able to use it to further develop your board, it's actually pretty big hindrance.
We've also seen that he has another Force of Will in hand, so, I mean, Mana Crypt may be a win condition here. I've certainly won games that way.
I've definitely lost games that way. Not in Legacy, but in Commander and Vintage.
Yeah, I really like the overlap right now with Commander. I've been seeing a lot of people who love the Commander format and love playing with the powerful cards. They're getting more interested in Vintage, and I think that's a really good thing. I feel like Commander's a good way for people to get used to the explosive plays and the crazy things that can happen. And it also leads them down that road of getting some of those more expensive cards. You know, Mana Crypt is in most Commander decks. Mana Drain is creeping its way into a lot of the blue decks.
Time Twister.
Absolutely. And a couple of years ago, if you had a Time Twister in your EDH deck, people would kind of not handle that too well. They'd kind of feel like that was too much. But I don't see that happening at all anymore. I see people really having fun with it, and people are really comfortable with the power level.
So he resolved a turn 2 Young Pyromancer, and you took another 3 damage off of your Mana Crypt. If you don't hit a land drop soon, it's gonna be pretty tough.
So I'm surgicaling here to find out what's going on. I go to hit the Force of Will, knowing he has no counters that I'd really be worried about if I can get that here. And he's going to go ahead and force pitching Hercules, which is that a Hercules? That's totally dead. Okay, I guess it could get my Blightsteel. I'm a fan of boarding that out. So here we go. Hit my land drop. A few cards to deal with. Doing some serious damage to myself here in between the Mana Crypt and fetch lands.
Yeah.
And let's see what I'm able to do.
Fortunately, Warren is down a lot of cards.
Yeah, he's only got 2 left in hand, so let's see what I got. Hey, that's the whole game plan.
Ancestral.
That's
there you
the
go.
game plan right there. Play the Ancestral.
Let's pull right back in.
And we're off. I mean, that's what my deck's trying to do. I can't really complain from there. I drew my land. I had the Snapcaster. And let's see what I can do from here. I'm not going to complain about this game state. I mean, he's got the Pyromancer. He can't swing in with it. He can only swing in with the tokens. And let's see what else he can do. So
I'm going to guess he's going to regrow Ancestral this turn and cast it.
That would be a devastating line. So with 2 cards in hand, he drew the extra mana, so he can actually make that play now. This could be brutal.
Gets a token with his classic Slowbro tokens.
So we've got a problem here. So he's following my game plan even better because he's got the Regrowth instead of the Snapcaster, making it possible to do again later on. Hitting that mana source there was crucial. If he had passed the turn, then I could have potentially responded to the Regrowth with a Snapcaster flashing back Surgical Extraction. Instead, he's off to the races here. A growing army of tokens, continuing to make land drops now. And Preordain. Getting value off of a spell like Preordain. I mean, that's where you want to be if you're playing that card.
Now, is he going to keep, what is that, a Force of Will or a Mystical Tutor?
Can't quite tell. It looks like a Mystical to me.
Mystical, yeah.
Mystical would be very tempting here. There's a lot of value in continuing to get those tokens, and also a lot of explosive plays that you can get off of the Mystical.
Right.
A Yogg will, if he ends up with the black mana for it, or even just another Regrow Ancestral is 2 more tokens and who knows how many more cards.
Oh yeah, you can play, Regrowth is not restricted anymore.
No, that's the really exciting thing about this engine. I'd been tinkering with Gush previously, and the problem is you can't merchant scroll for them to chain them together, but you can do that with Regrowth. And that's a big part of the reason why I was so excited to have Surgical Extraction in my sideboard here, is because that Regrowth plan is essential to their game plan. And if you can get rid of their Gushes, which they're typically chaining, I mean, you're in awesome shape. So Demonic Tutor here, pretty good.
Now, you used a blue and a black rather than floating a colorless in black. So what could you be getting? Time Vault and Vault Key?
I mean, I'm going with Tinker here.
Oh, Tinker.
The reason why I did it that way, if he did counter the Demonic Tutor, then I have more mana open on his turn for whatever reason.
Okay.
For example, if there's a flusterstorm type of effect, but I'm pretty much at that point. I'm going to be demonic and tinker no matter what. This is a really difficult game state. He could just put me out at any time. If he can't, then the Blightsteel is going to take him out in a turn or two.
Right. So if he chooses to swing into you, you can make a couple of blocks, take away some of his tokens, and then he doesn't have as many defenders. He needs to have at least 2 blockers just to survive if he's not going to kill you outright.
Yeah, I'm doing my best here to represent some kind of threat. He's definitely had a lot more card advantage here, despite some of the lines that have been taken. The Pyromancer is doing a lot of work. We'll see where this goes. I think Warren's feeling it's a fairly tense game state. He realizes that a misplay will end the game immediately.
Mm-hmm.
What's also interesting is Blightsteel having trample. If he keeps back 2 guys and I bolt one of them, that's the game. So now it becomes a question of how many blockers do I leave back? What if I draw up a Jace? I mean, there's a lot of potential ways where he could lose here, and not a lot of time for him to try and overwhelm me.
Right.
I was able to tinker away the mana crypt, so I no longer have a clock for damage coming from my side of the table. He's going to have to do the work himself from here. Now, if he kept that mystical, there's a lot of lines that would just be a blowout. Now, is this the game that he pitched the Hercules Recall?
Yes.
So he may not even have an answer to the Blightsteel, which is very interesting. And looking over his list, I'm thinking it's just Jace to get rid of it. So he's going to have to find a way to win.
So he's fetching. He has the mystical, and I thought I saw a Yawgmoth's Will in his hand. So maybe he mysticals this turn, sets up to not die, and then goes for a big Yawgwill next turn. He already has the Ancestral in there. Maybe mystical for a Time Walk. Or a Demonic Tutor. Or just Yawgwill right now.
Let's see what he opts for. Got the Yawgwill.
Now, in his list, he actually has Regrowth, so if you counter Yawgwill, he can mystical for Regrowth and Yawgwill next turn.
Absolutely. Yeah, Regrowth is a really good card. There are ways to interact with it beyond just countering it, which makes the downside very real, but I mean, the upside of being able to just jam Yawgmoth's Will and have your opponent trying to stop it. I mean, Mindbreak Trap is one of the only ways of really eliminating that from the game, and that's not seeing as much play anymore.
I think you missed a Pyromancer token. Is it only instants,
Oh,
or
yeah.
is it instants and sorceries?
No, he's missing Pyromancer triggers here. That looks like 2 so far, with the Ancestral and the Yawgwill.
Maybe his plan is just to tendrils you out for the rest, and sometimes you can kind of get tunnel vision when you have a plan that you think is going to work.
So we're down 2 tokens. Oh, there's the tendrils.
I guess that's not the plan.
Oh, I don't know what just happened. We have.
What's when you accidentally flip extra cards from the bottom of the library?
Oh, they were on the bottom and they accidentally flipped over.
Alright, we're trying to figure out the plan here to resolve this properly. Little issue. I think I'm just telling him to go ahead and resolve it, however, at this point.
Everything's on the bottom. So he did put tendrils on the bottom, which is so now I'm kind of curious as to what his plan is.
Yeah, it's only a single tendrils in the list, so it's not like he's got an excess one. We're getting more Slowbro. Very, very interesting here. Now he still has the mystical in hand, correct? So he could mystical for time walk, following whatever I do on my turn. But he is completely tapped out. I mean, this is a very substantial opening for me. What do we have for Force of Wills over there? We got a force, just one force. The force and the mystical. So if I have time walk and a counter, that's game.
So he just opts to pass the turn. You have two red sources, so I would recommend blocking with 4, just to for what you could potentially be. Oh well, he has force, so maybe. Oh, he's thinking about it still. He goes with 3.
3 is a pretty safe number. He still needs to kill me on his turn.
Right, so he doesn't want to get rid of too many.
He has 3 damage coming through on his turn. I don't think he can afford to swing with the Pyromancer.
No.
Oh, and we've got another blocker. So that's
He needs to find
actually
time walk it. Well, he has brainstorm and mystical tutor.
yeah,
With
and he could
force
force
backup.
he could force here and get another guy, which may be tempting enough.
Right, since it is on your turn, when he untaps, it'll be able to swing. Definitely relevant.
So if I didn't do anything, he'd be able to hit me for 3, and then he'd have to come up with 4 more spells in order to be lethal. We got the mystical tutor.
On the upkeep.
Almost certainly for time walk here.
Yeah, that'll most likely do it.
Yeah,
Unless you have double counter backup, even still, that would create such a massive. Well, what have you put him at? 7 poison.
he's
should
at
be
7
eight.
poison. Yeah, if I
11 minus
oh, you're
be
right.
8
It should
poison.
be. It should be absolutely. Pretty rare for somebody to be able to absorb 2 hits from a Blightsteel,
Right.
even with a army of blockers.
Yeah, he would need to make just so many.
Yeah, we'd be looking at another 8 guys, right? Well, if it was 8, then he has to absorb all but 2, so 9 more blockers.
Yeah.
And then they're gone. It's not. I mean, he still needs to kill me because then there's Blightsteel still
Right.
there for the next turn.
So he time walks here. He's definitely going to want to play some more spells on this turn. So time walk is.
Yeah, if he can play enough spells, then he can just get in there for lethal the following turn. You know, he may be worried about Lightning Bolt messing with things, but if I had a Lightning Bolt, I would have gotten rid of the Pyromancer at this
Yeah.
point.
So he
Yeah,
makes his land drop.
Now he's got a Brainstorm still, I believe?
Yeah, it seems like he should just run it out there.
Yeah, Brainstorm before the fetch is the combo. I mean, it's the best
Yeah.
combo in the game.
At this point, I don't know what he's holding the force for. Maybe he's thinking you boarded in Echoing Truth.
I mean, I could have a counterspell potentially. I could have potentially drawn
Yeah.
a counterspell on my turn. I don't think there's been any
Yeah,
must counters.
But he already resolved the time walk, so I don't
Okay.
understand.
There's the Jace.
Yeah.
Things just got bad.
Yeah.
Just 3 comes in. At this point, any token I block is going to essentially gain me 2 life because it's this attack in the next attack.
Mm-hmm. So you got to block 2 here.
I might also be holding back to block the Pyromancer the following turn, which is also 2 damage.
Yeah.
So definitely need to at least block 1, if not both.
He just took all 3. He goes to his Time Walk turn. Is he going to bounce one of your blockers? That seems
That's
appropriate.
probably what I was thinking, is if I go down to 1 guy, then he can just bounce it anyways.
He's got 2, 3, 4.
What I should have done there is block with Dark Confidant, because Snapcaster is essentially immune to being bounced. That would have been a much better line.
Oh, yeah.
Block 1 with Dark Confidant, let him try and attack the next time, and then 1, 2...
So I don't think he can actually kill you this turn, unless he happens to... Did he shuffle his library? If he draws the tendrils and just casts it, I don't think you're actually dead this turn. But without your Blightsteel, well, yeah, okay. Because you're only going to take 5, only 4 if he leaves his Pyromancer back, which he probably will because he knows that he's not going to kill you this turn.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, it's no longer a dangerous situation for him. With the Blightsteel in my hand, I mean, this is really bad. I still have lethal. He's got a Jace. I mean, he's got a force in hand. It may have just been a point where it's like, all right, let's just make something happen. I'm going to win pretty much no matter what.
Turn some cards sideways, get things rolling.
Yeah, you don't have to have the best play at that point when you're going to win no matter which play you choose. At this point, I'm dead to the tokens. He's got a Jace. He's got a force. I mean, there's not a lot of options here.
Yeah.
I drop a library. When I'm playing for actual prizes, I tend to not scoop. It's very easy to pick up on for good players when the body language and the way someone's playing, they just know that they're going to lose.
Right.
And it's definitely to your benefit to just make them kill you, because sometimes they'll misplay, sometimes they'll play around things, they'll play a little bit more conservatively. And
give
the
you an
other
extra turn. Absolutely.
And the other side, you're never going to catch anybody if you scoop all the time, and then the one time that you have the trick that could blow them out, you perk up and you're like, all right, I guess you got to kill me. You got to behave the same all the time for that 1 in 100 game where you have the amazing play that pulls victory from the jaws of defeat. So. That was just showing the only sideboard option there, the surgical I was excited to have on sideboarding there. But yeah, Warren took it down with some new technology. Young Pyromancer is the real deal. I look forward to seeing his game in the finals. I'm actually not sure what he played against. And, I mean, it got past a deck that's been really good. This Grixis list, I was in the finals of the last 2 events. I've done really well all over the place with it. I've seen other people putting up good results. And, Pyromancer could be in addition to the Grixis list or just a completely different direction altogether. So we'll see how this shakes out over the next few months and see if it's still really good by the time championships roll around in November.
Right. Should be pretty interesting, very exciting. So now we're moving on to the finals. I hope you guys are as excited as we are here, and we'll see you there.